Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about Trails of Cold Steel 1. You may notice that I don't have a review for Trails to Azure out. That's because, as of the time of this recording, the Geofront patch launched yesterday, and I finished Trails of Cold Steel at 2 a.m. this morning. So, I went ahead and played through Cold Steel 1, which I'll talk about what I think about that experience in a minute, with things that I don't know and things that I'm looking forward to, because I'm actually really excited about where I'm at in the series right now. But I want to talk about Cold Steel itself first. For non-spoiler section, with no spoilers, I will say that I very much enjoyed this game, but that the first 10 hours or so, maybe 15, were kind of rough. I don't think this game has the best opening, especially not the best opening in the series so far. I do think that you kind of have to stick with it, and that it's a little slow at the beginning. I mean, it's kind of slow all the way through, but that's not a bad thing, right? It's building up. It's trying to set the stage for a lot of what's going to happen, not just at the end of this game, but I'm sure in the games to come. So non-spoilery, yes, I think you should play this, but be warned ahead of time. It's very different at the start from the other Trails games. It feels a lot more like a standard JRPG in a lot of ways than Trails in the Sky or Trails from Zero did. Uh, but after that first 15 hours or so period, it really starts to gain traction, and the characters take off, as you know, Trails characters always do. Wind up being really, really solid. The way that everything connects in together winds up being really cool, and I'll get into all that when I get into the spoiler section. But for the non-spoiler section, absolutely, I think it's worth playing. I absolutely don't think you should start here, but I guess you could. But it 100%, it is worth playing. That's basically all I can do for non-spoilers because I want to talk about spoilers so bad. So we're going to talk about spoilers, but we're going to go down the class first. My thoughts on the characters. I guess we'll do game first, then characters, then everything else. Cold Steel as a whole. This is with spoilers, by the way. So if you don't want to hear spoilers for Trails of Cold Steel, you should probably click off this video now and go play it for yourself. Trails of Cold Steel 1 is a very, very solid game that I think has kind of an unfortunate beginning. That intro section, it's so different from the other Trails games, right? I think it'd be one thing if I hadn't just played them, but having just played, like I've been playing all these since February, and I am now in May, the end of May, and I've beaten the fifth. It's technically the sixth game, but I've beaten 5 games in the series. And to go from up and coming bracers trying to find their way in the world and trying to understand how the world works to church executioner who is trying to cope with the trauma that he has to cops trying to deal with a bad system and a dirty organization and trying to make the best of it to students is kind of a harsh transition, right? Now, granted, I love this game, and by the end of it, I'm probably about like 10, 15 hours into it. Like I said earlier, I 100% understood why we were students. It makes sense. It's perfect in the way the game works to give you the show of both the class system, a way around that, working together despite it, and to show just how deep rooted a lot of these issues are. The school setup is a great way to do that, right? But it's a very big transition, and it's not helped by some of the opening moments in that dungeon. The opening dungeon, I don't think, is that great. The stuff with Reed and Elisa really kind of set me off right away. Of, well, we haven't had an accidental grope in the series, and that's where we're starting this one. But I do absolutely think all the characters come into their own. I also think that the Machias and Eustace problem, uh, it's more overstated in that dungeon than it is in the rest of the game. But it's to sell you on the fact that, hey, this is a noble and this is a commoner and this is the problem. And in a lot of ways, they wind up shoehorned into being the example for both in that early dungeon. Whereas in the rest of the game, they have more room to grow and flesh out and show that just because they are of that class, that's not who they are. Fee in that opening dungeon kind of just doesn't care, and it doesn't really get to show anything about who she is as a character. Um, Emma is, of course, tight-lipped, as you would expect. And so you really only get to know Gaius and Elliot in that opening chapter. And when you have a cast as big as you do in Cold Steel 1, 9 main characters, like, and you get even more later, it really doesn't help their cause that this was the introduction, that only 3 of them were kind of really likable, you know? Um, I do think as you get out of that first dungeon and you get to spend some time with them in the school, I think that absolutely changes. I wound up loving all of these characters. All of them are really solid. Crow is my favorite, and we'll get to that as well. But I think that the school setup, while it does work, it absolutely is going to turn some people away, right? Um, in this series, it's one thing as a JRPG, right? There's a lot of JRPG set in schools, but in this series, a lot of what you're doing is going around to all these different places. And at first glance, that's not what Cold Steel is, right? Cold Steel 1 is not that. At first glance, Cold Steel 1 is Trista and Thors. When you get into the field studies, that absolutely changes. But at first glance, I won't mince words, I did not like this game at the beginning. I think it stands on its own and shows to show that, hey, maybe I should be more patient, because by the end of this game, I loved this game and I loved these characters and I absolutely cried. But it was different, right? It was very tough to wrap my head around at first, because Erebonia was a place that I was looking forward to so much that I couldn't even wait a month and a half for the Trails to Azure patch to drop. You know, I wanted to get to Erebonia that bad, which again, I'll get back to that in a minute because I'm paying for that in a way. And so from wanting to go see Erebonia so bad to then get, well, go to this academy, was kind of a harsh change, you know? And then you also have the fact that the Bracer Guild's not really around in Erebonia. And so a lot of the core things that I like about this series aren't in this game, which is really interesting because I still wound up really loving it. I think that because of the setup, you're able to get a lot more focus on these characters that very cleverly come from very different parts of the Empire, right? Each of them is connected to something different in a different part of the Empire, and that allows you to really capitalize on those character interactions to explain what life in the Empire is like without having to go everywhere, right? I would have loved to be able to see what the other group was always doing on field studies, to be able to see those areas. Hoping maybe we get to go there in Cold Steel too. But it was really cool to get to go see glimpses of these different places in the Empire from Class 7's perspective, because we got to see the nobles, commoners, everybody in between, Osborne's faction, the Railway Military Police, the Imperial Liberation Front. And because we got all these different sides, it made it really interesting and dynamic every time we got to a new area, where I was going, okay, so what is happening here? Because none of the sides are fully wrong, but some of them are more wrong than others, right? And it makes it really interesting to see the way it affects our characters, especially when you meet Gileath Osborne and you have this guy who the Sky series told us was a villain, who the Crossbow games had kind of painted in like a nebulous light. To see that, hey, there's obviously more going on, right? This man believes he is correct. He just doesn't care who he has to steamroll over. But the people that work for him, Lecter, who we first got to see in Sky the Third, who immediately made us question, well, this seems like a good guy. Why is he working for the Chancellor? Then we got to see him more in Zero, you know? Claire and Milliam show us that, hey, not everybody working for the Chancellor is as cutthroat as he is. Some of these people are just trying to make Erebonia better, you know? Maybe the Chancellor's not so bad after all. But then we have the Imperial Liberation Front, and we have Crow, who I will talk about in a minute, and we have Vulcan and Scarlet and Gideon, who each have their own reasons for going against him. And it's just so interesting to see the way that all of this affects Class 7. And as much as I want to talk about Reen first, because I do really like Reen, I think the person who changes the most over the course of this game is Machias. And so as you see all this affecting the class, Machias opens up from I hate all nobles to, well, no, I hate one noble. And I don't even really hate him. I hate the situation, and I took it out on him, and then by extension, all the others. And you don't just see that with him, you see it with Eustace as well. You see it with a little bit with Fee. You see it a little bit with Elisa, and it's all comes back to, well, maybe there's a reason for the way, like, why we feel these things, and if we can cut down to the core of the reason, then maybe we can try to understand more people. And the class, the way they come together, granted, most of it is because Reen is trying to bring them together, but the way they come together is really solid and pays off so well at the end. So I guess we should stop beating around the bush. Let's talk about the characters. Um, we're already 10 minutes in and I haven't touched the characters yet. Machias. I love Machias. At first, I couldn't stand Machias. It was really weird to hear a character be like a good character, like on the right side, on the playable side, be like, well, a girl shouldn't help with that. Because LeBurl obviously didn't have that problem, and Crossbell, really didn't have that problem. Lloyd made one comment about Tio's age and got shortchanged for it really quick. But it was really odd to hear that. I guess I found out things are different in Erebonia, which is really cool. But from there to just straight like, well, Eustace, he's a noble, so he's worthless. It's like, okay. I mean, that's a bit excessive, Machias. But it was really interesting to see him grow and change, his conflict with Reen, and then it all come to a head when he gets arrested. I think Machias is a really, really solid character. And his moment in Heimdall really hit home for me. That was a really powerful moment. Elliot. Elliot is another really solid character that I think I went and watched a video of all the endings afterwards. And I think Elliot's is really poignant, where he's just like, I'm terrified, but I'm going to do what's right anyway. And that really sells Elliot for me, because Elliot all game is the normal one, constantly thrown into these abnormal situations, but he keeps going anyway to help his friends, you know? Gaius is really cool. I really loved the Nord chapter. Gaius is a lot of fun, and I hope that he gets some more spotlight in the future. I liked Elisa. Elisa was probably my least favorite of the love interests, right? The ones that you could interact with. But I do still think she's a really solid character. I think that her interactions with Reen are really good, except for that first one. And I think that where she grows as a character is really, really solid. Emma was pretty cool. It was very obvious that Emma was keeping a lot of secrets, but I don't think that's a bad thing per se, because she was letting slip what needed to be let slip at the time. And Reen trusts her in a way that I really appreciated, of like, hey, I don't know what you're trying to do, and I don't like that, but I trust you because we've been together for 6 months now and you've had my back over and over again. I trust you, especially after like he had just been proven wrong for that trust with Crow. You know, it's look, I'll get to Crow in a minute. Fee is really cool. I really like Fee. Fee's story of, hey, I used to be a Jaeger. Now I'm just trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. And her found family story, where Class 7 winds up becoming her family, you know, is really powerful. I love Laura. Laura was my favorite of the love interest. Laura is absolutely incredible. Her arc of, I'm a noble, thus I must be strong, to no, I want to be strong for my own sake and for the of those I care about, was really intriguing to me. I liked that a lot. And her conflict with Fee was really cool. It was really nice to just have a character say, hey, I recognize that I shouldn't have a problem with you. I recognize that this is my fault, but I'm still upset about it and I can't just let it go. And I was like, yeah, okay, cool. Um, I'm forgetting somebody. I'm forgetting somebody for sure. Milliam. Milliam, she joins late, right? So does Crow. But I like Milliam. She's fun. I especially like her reactions to what happens afterwards, where it's almost like, obviously she's upset that Gramps, as she called him, has been shot, but it's almost like she's free. Like she's more free in those scenes. Like she's choosing what to do for her own sake now because her mission's done. And I think that's a really powerful moment for her, even though it's just a little thing, right? Um, let's talk about Reen, and then we'll talk about Crow. I really like Reen. At first, Reen comes off kind of as, you know, the guy who's more capable than he should be and is hiding it for the sake of hiding it because he wants to be normal. That's not why he's hiding it. He's hiding it because he's actually super afraid of his capableness, which I think is really cool. I'm almost positive he's got a stigma. It really seems like he's got a stigma. But unlike Kevin, who had a place to vent it with the church, and unlike Randy, who, you know, obviously was raised to be able to control it when he got mad, uh, Reen doesn't have that, you know? So Reen attempted to take up the way of the sword so that he could be stronger than that stigma. I'm assuming it's a stigma. Um, it's really interesting to me the way that pays off in his character because he's very docile, but he's also very aggressive in a really interesting way where most of the time he will just be calm and hanging out and trying to keep the peace. But then when there's danger and the old him, the part that embraced the stigma, wakes up, he's jumping in head first to protect anybody, you know? And it's a really interesting dynamic because you have like Estelle who wasn't that strong at first, but always was that headstrong and aggressive. And you have Lloyd who, you know, maybe isn't ever going to be as strong as like Irene, right? But was always the I say always. Sometimes he got really hot headed too, but like was the more calculating one. So it's really interesting to see Reen be like a mix of that. I like the way that he embraces people. He's just like, yeah, it's, you know, you do you. Angelica, yeah. Crow, sure. George, all right. Toa, yeah, let's go. I really like Reen's desire to bring people together. I think that his goal of like, hey, you know, at the end of the day, we're all in this together anyway, so let's just do our best, is really solid. And I wound up really liking Reen in a way that I definitely didn't think I was going to after that opening scene with Elisa falling on top of him. Let's talk about Crow. Crow's my favorite character in this game. Um, so I actually called that Crow was C fairly early on. There was just something about Crow that didn't seem right. And then, you know, obviously his name starts with a C, and that seems to be the naming sequence for them. And the only other ones were Vita Clotilde and Cassius Bright, who I really didn't think it was. But at the same time, you know, I fell for the trick when he sniped the airship. I fell for it. I absolutely did. I just assumed, okay, well, Crow just came in with George, so I guess he's not C. I guess it must be Vita Clotilde, who she's something else entirely. Um, yeah, I really like Crow. The fact that, especially early on, when I was positive that he was C, the way that he composes himself, the way that he acts, it all very much is an act, right? He wants to be the fun-loving guy, hanging out with everybody, having a good time, but he's not. It's so obviously a front that it's crazy to me that Reen doesn't really like figure it out, right? Especially when George later on mentions that when they first met, he felt like he was putting on an act, you know? Just moments of Crow being like, huh, yeah, that's what we should do. Where it's like, yeah, he really doesn't care at all. He has no interest in this. He's just here because it's part of his alibi. But then over the course of the game, you get those moments where Crow actually does open up and actually does seem to care. And it's really clear that he actually does care about Reen, but his goals are more important. And I think what really sells that is the scene where he gives back the 50 Mira, which also, by the way, that was when C drops the lance. That was when I was absolutely positive that it was Crow. Because that's Crow's misdirection, you know? But I think that final scene between them, where Crow almost seems to want to lose to Reen so he can go back. And then when he does, remembers that he can't and beats him. And it's just a really powerful arc. I like Crow a lot. I'm really interested to see where that goes throughout the rest of the series because Crow did some things that can't just be taken back, you know? But I don't think he was lying on the stage either, which we'll get to the stage in a minute too. Yeah, I really, really liked Crow's character, and I cannot wait to see more of him. Minor characters were all really good. Don't really want to get into every one of those. But Sarah was great. Nightheart was really great. I loved all the instructors. They were really great. I really liked finding out that Sarah was the Purple Flash, one of the bracers. Meeting Toby from Sister Cornelia. As Tuval, what more could you ask for? You know, that's great. I love that story. So getting to meet Toby, heck yeah. Um, yeah, there's just a lot to love in this game. The characters were great. The music was great. The pacing was not, but everything else I really enjoyed. I do think I do have a little bit of complaints, and then I want to get into my thoughts on the spoilers, and then I want to talk about the ending, because the ending I'm super positive on, and I want that to be the last thing I talk about. Um, Complaints wise, I think it's really weird that for as long as this game is, and as slow as some points take, we just skip the vacation to Ymir and get a little bit of voiceover, and we skip Angelica leaving and get a little bit of voiceover. I get that we probably were rushed for time at that point, but it just feels really weird, especially with how long some of the previous scenes had been. Every once in a while, there'll be like a cutscene that starts, and you notice there's a spot skipped, and there'll be like one line of dialogue, and then we'll flash back and do the full cutscene. We could have just done the full cutscene. I don't need Reed to go, yeah, man, we made that decision last night, and then it flashed back to last night. You could have just done the cutscene for last night after the previous one. Um, but for the most part, that's really about it. You know, I really enjoyed this game. I will say I played it on PS5, PS4 version using Turbo most of the time because characters move very slowly in this game. I always turned it off for big story moments, but anytime that it was just like walking around the city or combat, that absolutely got turned on because the models move very slowly. Let's talk about where it's at for me in the series. So I played Cold Steel 1 before I have touched Azure, which means that I know some things happen in Crossbell. And I was warned ahead of time that I would know, right? That I would be spoiled for Azure stuff in Cold Steel 1. My personal thoughts on it are that I don't really care if I get spoiled on stuff by learning about it in the game, because I'm still how do I put this? I'm still, man, I'm still experiencing it, right? Like, yes, I know that something is going to happen in Azure, but I experienced it happening in Cold Steel. May not be as good as experiencing it happen in Azure, right? I obviously can't say I won't ever be able to know now. But for me, it doesn't really bother me because I experienced it all the same. It would be different if somebody had left a YouTube comment that was like, hey, this is what happens in Azure, or if I had Googled it and read up on the wiki to see what happens. But because I experienced it naturally over the course of the story, I'm good with it. Now, I don't want to start Cold Steel 2 until after I finish Azure because I know that I'll spoil more stuff from Azure, and I really want to see the events that I know happen in Crossbell and how they happened. I have a lot of questions there, and what I love most about going to it from Cold Steel 1 is that they didn't explain anything because they expect you to already know, which I think is really cool. It is because I was impatient, right? But I think that's really cool. I've been told that Azure is going to spoil Cold Steel 2. Again, that's fine. I will have experienced it through Azure, so I'm okay with that. The side effect of me playing in this weird order is that the cliffhanger ending of Cold Steel 1 will not get resolved until after I've played through all of Azure. So that's fun. But let me talk about that ending. That ending was incredible. I absolutely adore that ending. Before the ending, let's walk back to that entire day, right? So, the final dungeon was cool. I really liked it. I haven't even talked about the combat system in this game yet. The final dungeon was really cool. I had a great time in there. It was long, but it wasn't like Sky FC long, where it was super confusing. The dungeon, for the most part, made a lot of sense. I liked the doors and everything there. There were a lot of really tough enemies, um, but at the same time, didn't have too much difficulty with it. I do think it's really weird that for most of the game, you won't have all your slots unlocked for characters, even if you do all the side quests. But then by the end of the game, not only have you been given a ton of quartz, you've got all your slots unlocked, and you kind of just have extra quartz laying around. I guess if you wanted to, you could make everybody HP3 quartz, right? Oh, that does remind me of a thing I want to talk about in the combat system real quick. I wish that I had the option to turn off auto unequip from the rest of my party members. It really bothered me because I didn't. I'm sure there were a lot of people that min maxed every time, right? Every time you go out on a field study, it changes your group, it unequips all the other group stuff, and then you have all your stuff available. But for me, I got enough stuff early on for everybody. And so I just wanted to keep people equipped with what they had, and that wasn't an option. So every time I would get a field study, I would have to go and equip everybody again instead of it sticking. And I understand why they did it, but it definitely was kind of a pain. Um, Combat in this game is really good. I think this is probably the best the series has had with combat, right? Um, the Arcus with the links and everything, the combat links are really cool. The different abilities you get from that, strike, rush, and the other one, burst. That's it. All really solid, right? Some very cool stuff you can do there. The link abilities are really cool. So like the cover, auto heal, all that stuff, really, really nifty. It definitely made it feel worth it to mix and match my links to try and level a bunch of them up. I only wound up getting like 3 characters to link 5 because on your first playthrough, you definitely don't have enough points to go visit with everybody and spend time with everybody on your free days, which is kind of a pain. And especially since I knew on New Game Plus, I would have that option because a comment told me so. But for the most part, I really enjoyed the combat in this game. And I think the link system was really well done. I'm excited to see where that goes. Back to the final dungeon. Final boss was really cool. That was a fun fight. Final boss had the ability to like absorb one of your characters, and then if you could do enough damage, he would knock them back out and take a bit of damage as well. Had a lot of resistances, as most final bosses in the series do, but this one was a lot of fun. I think Sky the Third still has the most fun final boss for me, but this one, Zero, Sky SC, and Sky the Third, top tier final bosses. Um, I say final boss because that was the final dungeon boss, right? But there's still the crow fight after that. And I really love these mechs. I was so ecstatic when I saw the mechs. I could not believe it. Chancellor got shot. That was a thing. Don't know what's going to happen there. I got to dance with Laura, though, so that's nice. That whole final sequence, man, of the instructors holding back the. I've already forgotten the name. I just heard it this morning. The mechs, holding them off to protect Trista and the Academy was really cool. And then, of course, your class goes on the other side and tries to defend it. And then you summon in Valimar, and that's super cool. But then you got to fight Crow. And that Crow fight is really serious. That's a really, really solid moment. And it's only made better when Crow comes to finish you off and the class says, no, you don't. And they all move in to protect you, full knowing they could die because they need to get Reen and Valimar out of there. And what I love so much about that moment isn't just that it's Class 7 coming together to protect Reen. It's that all game long, Reen has been throwing himself between problems and Class 7, right? He's the de facto leader, not because he wanted the job, but because nobody else wanted the job. He's the one that has consistently put himself out there to try and help them. And now, in this moment, they get the chance to do the same. And I'm getting emotional again because it's such a powerful moment for me where they all jump in to defend him just so he can get away. Again, knowing they might not make it out. I love it. I love that moment so much. Only moment that I liked more in this game, possibly my favorite moment for this whole stretch, we'll see going into CS2 after Azure, right, is the band, right? The concert, that's it. I wish we could have got to hear the first 2 songs. It makes sense why we didn't. They were just playing snippets of it. But the moment that they start singing I Swear from Sky SC, I got super emotional. I love that song. And the fact that everybody else was singing along, including Olivier, who was right there, Olivert, I know, really, really powerful, right? That was a great moment. That's also why I refuse to believe that Crow has really thrown it all away, and I'm really interested in seeing where things go. The game ends out on such a cliffhanger with Valimar taking Reen away and Reen just going, no, they need me. They need my help. And then just being launched away. And of course, depending on who you danced with, you get a scene where that character will tell Reen it's okay. I watched all of those on YouTube afterwards. They're all really good. But Laura's is still my favorite, where I will take up this fight for you. I will be the blade, and this blade will not break until we are reunited. I really liked that. I do think that some of the relationship stuff in this game doesn't super work because the game clearly is pushing Reen and Elisa, so it feels kind of weird to even give me the choice. But the fact that I got all these extra cutscenes with Laura, it paid off for me. I like it. Man, this game was really good. It's hard to talk about because of how long it is. Like, do I talk about the stuff in Celtic? Do I talk about the stuff in Ruhr? You know, like it's a very long game. But I really, really enjoyed my time with it. And if I had to pick a chapter that was my favorite, it's probably the Nord Highlands chapter. That's where we really start to get to see the effects of Calvard and Erebonia being at almost war all the time. We get to hear more stuff about Crossbell during that time too, leading up to the trade conference. I think that all the stuff with Blue Blanc is really cool and fun, and I was glad to see him there. I'm looking for more crossovers, you know. And of course, we found out that Sharon is a enforcer from Ouroboros, so that's super hype right there. What's gonna happen there, you know? Yeah, I want to see more crossover, and I'm really curious what's going on in Liberl right now. I wish that we could get a cut over there. And of course, I'm 100% dying to know what happens in Crossbell. So I'll be going to Azure next. And then after Azure, we'll do Cold Steel 2, Cold Steel 3, Cold Steel 4. For everybody who stuck with me on this journey throughout the series, I very much appreciate it. This is quickly becoming one of my favorite video game franchises. Trails of Cold Steel, Trails in the Sky, second chapter. I'm trying to think of second game, and I'm thinking about the cliffhanger, and I want to go to Cold Steel 2, but I'm going to play Azure first. Trails in the Sky, second chapter, is my favorite game in the series still. Second favorite game of all time right now. I love that game so much. I can't wait to replay it. But for me right now, the ranking would be Sky SC, Zero, Sky the Third, Cold Steel 1, Sky First Chapter. And the bottom two might switch places. We'll see. I do think that the slow build-up in both is warranted. I don't dislike that at all. But I also think that Sky FC being about half as long, maybe a third as long as Cold Steel 1, means that it's a lot easier to replay and that the build-up won't be as bad on a replay. Because I feel like Cold Steel 1 on a replay is probably still really slow. And right now I have no real desire to replay Cold Steel 1. I want to replay Zero. I want to replay FC and SC. And at some point I'll replay the third too, just to use a different party and play around with those dungeons. But let me know your thoughts on Cold Steel 1 in the comment section down below. I feel like there's something I definitely have forgotten to talk about. I guess we didn't talk about Reen's sister at all, Elise. She's all right. I like her well enough. I'm not huge on the because we're not blood, she's got a thing for Reen. But, you know, Reen obviously just wants to keep her safe. Yeah, I like these characters a lot. I'm really interested in seeing what happens. And I won't be able to until after Azure, but I've got to play Azure first because it's out now. And if you're excited to play Azure, make sure you look at the GeoFront's localization of it because localization, it's a mod, but it's very much a localization. It's to the quality that these full games are. One last thing I did want to call out real quick before we end. The voice acting. I played this game in English, Cold Steel 1. And everybody did a great job for the most part. I didn't really have any performances. Gilead Osborne's performance was a little weird for me at first. It's not the voice I expected him to have, but he definitely worked by the end of the game. But Sean Chiplock did an amazing job as Reen. That was a great job. Reen just so much emotion in that performance, especially at the end. Machias' voice actor did a really good job too. In fact, I think that all of Class 7 was really good. Sarah's VA was really good. Yeah, the voice work in this game was really, really solid. I liked it a lot. And I'm excited to see where all these characters go. I really want to know. I don't think any of Class 7, and don't tell me if I'm right or wrong, obviously, but I don't think any of Class 7 members are going to die. But I do think some of them could wind up imprisoned, forced to fight against people they don't want to fight against. And I would really love to see some putting up like a resistance and trying to fight back. I think that could be really cool. But let me know your thoughts on Cold Steel 1 in the comment section down below. At the end of the day, I come off of it going, this was a really solid game. It probably didn't need to be quite as slow as it was, but 77 hours later, I had defeated it and beaten it, and I loved it by the end of it, honestly. As slow as it was, I feel like it worked in its favor to sell you on those characters, right? Because the Machias from hour 1 is very different from the Machias from hour 77, right? The Fee from hour 1 is very different from the Fee from hour 77. And in a way, having it take 77 hours, which I did a bunch of side stuff that you don't have to do, right? But having it take 77 hours almost makes it feel more like the 6 months these characters actually had together. So, again, as much as I don't think it quite needed to be that long, I definitely understand that the story is helped by that. Again, let me know your thoughts, and until next time, when we talk about Azure, I've been Trey. This has been The Full Spectrum. Remember to always enjoy the full spectrum Trails of Cold Steel 1 has to offer.